Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Olympic National Park, Washington. October 2014. Mason pressed his thumb against the rim of his coffee cup, watching the steam dissipate into the cold morning air of the ranger station. Outside, the Hoh rainforest stretched in every direction, a dense carpet of Sitka spruce and western hemlock that seemed to swallow the weak autumn sunlight. He'd been in Olympic National Park for 36 hours now, and his sister Harper had been missing for 72. Dr. Reeves, I need you to understand something. Ranger Jessica Ortiz leaned forward across her desk, her weathered hands folded together. She was Kino, Mason had learned, born and raised near the reservation that bordered the park's southern edge. Your sister wasn't just hiking, she was asking questions, specific questions about places we don't recommend visitors go. Mason set down his cup with more force than intended. She's a grad student in anthropology. Asking questions is literally her job description. Questions about Daskia, Ortiz said quietly. The name meant nothing to Mason, and his face must have shown it. Ortiz sighed, pulling out a map of the park and circling an area deep in the Hoh River Valley. This is where we found her camp, abandoned, food still out. Her research notes scattered. And this, she tapped a spot further north where the map showed nothing but green. This is where her GPS tracker last pinged before it went dead. So send a search team there. We did. Nothing. No tracks, no signs of struggle, no blood. It's like she vanished into the forest itself. Ortiz paused, meeting his eyes with an intensity that made Mason uncomfortable. Dr. Reeves, your sister's notes. She was researching Basket Woman. Daskia. The old stories say she lives in these woods, that she collects people who wander too far into her territory, particularly those who disrespect the old ways. Mason felt his jaw tighten. This was exactly the kind of superstitious nonsense that had driven him into the hard sciences in the first place. While Harper had always been drawn to myths and folklore, Mason had built his career on empirical evidence, on the quantifiable reality of biology and ecology. He'd published 3 papers on wolf reintroduction programs. He dealt in facts, not fairy tales. With all due respect, Ranger Ortiz, I'm not interested in ghost stories. I'm interested in finding my sister. If your search teams can't do it, I'll do it myself. Something flickered in Ortiz's eyes. Was it pity? Warning? The old people would tell you that's exactly what Daskia wants. Fresh offerings walking straight into her basket. Mason stood, collecting the map and GPS coordinates. I'm a scientist. I don't believe in boogeyman. Your sister was a scientist too, Ortiz said softly. That's what worries me. The trail into the Hoh River Valley was stunning in that peculiar way that ancient forests are, beautiful and utterly indifferent to human presence. Massive trees thick as trucks rose into a canopy so dense that the forest floor existed in a permanent twilight. Everything was covered in moss. The fallen logs, the rocks, even the standing trees wore thick coats of emerald green. The air itself felt heavy, saturated with moisture and the smell of decomposition and growth occurring simultaneously. Mason had equipped himself sensibly: satellite phone, GPS unit, camping gear rated for the dropping temperatures, and enough supplies for 5 days. He'd done field work in remote areas before, wolf tracking in Montana, bear studies in Alaska. He knew how to handle himself in wilderness. What he wasn't prepared for was the silence. It wasn't the absence of sound exactly. There were noises, water dripping from leaves, the distant rush of the river, his own breathing. But there was something else, something underneath it all. A quality to the quiet that felt intentional. Waiting. He shook off the thought. He was letting Ortiz's superstitious warnings get to him. Harper's camp was exactly as described. Tent still standing, sleeping bag laid out, camp stove beside a half-prepared meal that had long since attracted ants. Mason photographed everything with his phone, his scientific training automatically cataloging details. No signs of struggle, no bear activity. Her backpack was gone along with her research notebook and camera, but her spare clothes and toiletries remained. She'd left willingly then, or been lured. He found her scattered notes weighted down by rocks around the fire pit, as if she'd been reviewing them before. Before what? Mason gathered them carefully, his heart clenching as he recognized Harper's precise handwriting. The basket woman, Daskia in Quinault language, is not merely a cautionary tale for children. Multiple sources confirm similar entities across Pacific Northwest tribes, the Sonoqua of Kwakwakawaku, the Zunukwa of Nu Cha-Nulth. Common elements: female entity, lives deep in forest, carries large basket on back, collects humans, especially children or disrespectful adults, associated with wealth or power, can be appeased with offerings. Local informant, J.C. Quinault Elder, refused to be recorded, warned me against visiting her places. When pressed for specifics, he mentioned the old cedar grove past the Ho River's North Fork. Said 3 people went missing there in the 1970s. Official explanation: drowning. His explanation: they didn't respect the boundary stones. Tomorrow I'm going to look for the grove. If the boundary stones exist, they'd be archaeological evidence of pre-contact sacred sites. Could be significant for my thesis. Mason's hands trembled slightly as he lowered the notes. Tomorrow. She'd written this the day before she disappeared. The North Fork of the Ho River. According to his map, that was the area where her GPS had gone dead. He checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. He could make it there before dark if he moved fast. But something made him hesitate. Some instinct that had nothing to do with science told him that going there now, alone, was a mistake. He should wait for official search teams, should coordinate with the rangers, should approach this methodically. Instead, he found himself packing his essential gear into a day pack, leaving his main camp set up as a base. Because whatever else Harper was, she was his little sister, the girl who'd held his hand during thunderstorms when they were kids, who'd cried on his shoulder when their mother died, who'd been the only person to attend his PhD defense. If she was out there, if there was even a chance she was alive and waiting for help, the rational part of his brain screamed that people didn't survive 3 days in October wilderness without shelter. The brother part didn't care. He started walking north. The forest changed as he moved deeper. The trees grew larger, older, their trunks twisted into shapes that seemed almost deliberate. The moss hung in thick curtains from branches, and the undergrowth became so dense that Mason had to force his way through, ferns and salal bushes clutching at his legs. The sound of the river grew louder, and then he was standing on its bank, watching dark water surge past over smooth stones. Crossing was going to be dangerous. The water moved fast, and the rocks looked slick. But on the far side, he could see what might have been a trail or maybe just a game path. Harper had come this way. He was certain of it now, though he couldn't have explained how he knew. He found a thick fallen branch to use as a walking stick and started across, testing each foothold carefully. The water was shockingly cold even through his waterproof boots, and the current was stronger than it looked. Halfway across, his foot slipped, and for a heart-stopping moment he was falling, the river reaching up to claim him. His stick caught against a rock, and he managed to keep his balance, gasping. When he looked up at the far bank, he saw them. Sticks, arranged vertically in the ground, forming a rough line parallel to the river. They'd been placed deliberately, he could tell, each one stripped of bark and carved with marks he didn't recognize. Some had bundles tied to their tops, what looked like cedar bark and faded cloth. Boundary markers. Mason pulled himself onto the far bank and approached the nearest stick, his heart hammering. He'd seen similar arrangements before, in his sister's research materials. Sacred markers used by indigenous peoples to denote spiritual boundaries, places where the human world thinned and other things could cross over. Superstition, he told himself firmly. Cultural artifacts, yes, but nothing more. The markings were probably just decorative, the placement random rather than mystical. But as he stepped past the line of sticks into the forest beyond, the temperature dropped 10 degrees in an instant. Mason stopped, breath misting in front of his face. That wasn't normal. Weather didn't change that abruptly. There had to be an explanation. A geographic feature channeling cold air, an underground stream, something. The bird calls that had been background noise throughout his hike suddenly ceased. Complete silence fell over the forest. Mason's rational mind scrambled for explanations even as something more primitive in his hindbrain screamed at him to run. Animals went quiet before predators arrived. That was natural. That was evolution and survival instincts. He saw movement between the trees. For just a second. Just a flash of something tall and wrong moving through the shadows about 50 yards ahead. Too tall to be a person. Moving too smoothly to be a bear. There and then gone. Swallowed by the dense undergrowth. His satellite phone was in his hand before he realized he'd reached for it. No signal. That was impossible. He'd had a signal at the river. But now the screen showed nothing, not even the GPS tracking working properly. Hello? His voice sounded small in the overwhelming quiet. Harper? No response. But now he could see it. A path of sorts, marked by broken ferns and disturbed moss. Something had passed through here recently. Something large. Or someone, he told himself. Harper was tall, nearly 6 feet. In poor light, moving quickly, she might look strange. She might be hurt, delirious, not responding to his call. That was the logical explanation. He followed the trail. The forest seemed to press closer around him as he moved. The trees here were truly ancient, their branches forming a canopy so thick that only sporadic beams of light penetrated to the forest floor. Mushrooms grew in spectacular clusters on every fallen log. Bright red, deep purple, luminescent white. The moss had a feverish quality to it, green so intense it almost hurt to look at. And then he saw the grove. It opened before him like a cathedral. Massive western red cedars, each trunk 20 feet across or more, standing in a rough circle around a clearing. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of needles and moss, soft under his boots. In the center of the clearing stood a structure that made Mason's blood run cold. It wasn't built so much as assembled. Bones, deer, elk, smaller animals he couldn't identify, woven together with cedar bark into a sort of cage or basket shape, nearly 8 feet tall. Hanging from the bones were objects, strips of cloth that might once have been clothing, a rusted pocket knife, a Walkman that had to date from the 80s, and Mason's stomach lurched. A student ID card and a plastic holder, dangling from a length of rotted cord. He stepped closer, already knowing what he would see. University of Washington. Sarah Chen, 1977, one of the missing hikers from Harper's notes. His hands shook as he took out his phone to photograph the structure, but the screen had gone completely black. Dead. Impossible. He'd charged it fully that morning, and it had been working minutes ago. But when he pressed the power button, nothing happened. Dr. Reeves. Mason spun so fast he nearly fell. Behind him, where nothing had been a moment before, stood a woman. She was Native American, elderly, wrapped in a blanket woven with geometric patterns. Her face was deeply lined, her eyes dark and unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice carrying a strange echo, as if speaking from inside a cave. "Who are you?" Mason demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did you see my sister?" Harper Reeves, about 26, brown hair. The one who asks questions. The woman nodded slowly. "Yes, she was here. She saw the boundary stones and crossed anyway. She saw the offerings and took photographs. She saw the old cedar and carved her name into its bark." The woman's expression remained unchanged, but something in her tone sent ice down Mason's spine. Daskia was offended. "That's not..." Mason took a breath, forcing himself back into rationality. "Look, I don't know who you are or what you're doing out here, but my sister is missing, and if you have information..." "Information?" the woman repeated, as if the word was foreign. You want information. You want facts. You want to understand with your small human mind what cannot be understood. She moved closer, and Mason noticed she left no footprints in the soft moss. Your sister wanted the same thing. She wanted to know if the stories were true. Now she knows. Where is she? The woman gestured toward the bone structure. In the basket. That's where Daskia puts those she collects. Some she eats, some she keeps, some she changes. Her eyes fixed on Mason with sudden intensity. Your sister was strong. Daskia likes strength. She'll keep your sister, make her into something new, something that serves the forest. This was insane. Mason took a step backward, hand going to his belt where he kept his bear spray. The woman might be mentally ill, might have hurt Harper, might be dangerous. He needed to get back to the ranger station, report this, get real help. You don't believe me, the woman said, and she smiled. It was the most horrible thing Mason had ever seen, that smile, because it was filled with something like pity. You need proof. You need to see to believe. She raised one hand, pointing behind him. Then see. Against every instinct screaming at him not to, Mason turned. The bone structure was opening. Not like a door. The bones themselves were moving, sliding apart like ribs expanding, and from the darkness within, something was emerging. It was tall. That was Mason's first coherent thought. 7 feet at least, maybe more. Its body was wrong. Too thin, limbs too long, joints bending in directions that shouldn't be possible. It was covered in what looked like cedar bark strips, woven with moss and lichen, hanging from its frame like ragged clothing or skin. He couldn't see a face, just darkness beneath a hood or shroud of bark. But he could see its hands, long fingers ending in wooden claws, and clutched in those fingers was a shape he recognized. A backpack. Harper's backpack, decorated with pins from national parks she'd visited. The thing that couldn't exist took a step toward him. Mason ran. He crashed through the undergrowth, thorns tearing at his clothes, low branches whipping his face. Behind him he could hear movement. Not footsteps exactly, but a rustling like wind through dry leaves getting closer. His lungs burned, his legs pumped, his mind screamed denials even as his body executed pure animal panic. This wasn't real. Couldn't be real. He was having a breakdown, a stress-induced hallucination, carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty camp stove. Something, anything that made sense. His foot caught on a root, and he went down hard, sliding across wet moss and dead leaves. He rolled onto his back, scrambling backward on his hands and heels, and looked up. The thing stood over him, impossibly tall, impossibly present. This close he could smell it. Wet earth and rotting cedar and something underneath that was almost sweet, like decay. The bark-covered arms reached down, and for one horrible moment, Mason thought he was going to die, was going to be taken into that terrible basket to join whatever remained of his sister. But the creature simply dropped Harper's backpack onto his chest and then straightened, tilting its head in a gesture that was eerily human. Watching him. She wants you to know. The old woman's voice came from somewhere nearby, though Mason couldn't see her. Your sister is hers now, but Daskia is not without mercy. She offers you a choice. Mason clutched the backpack to his chest like a shield, his entire body shaking. He tried to speak but couldn't make his throat work. You can leave, the woman continued. Return to your world. Tell them Harper was lost to the forest as so many before her. Accept what you cannot change. Or, there was a pause, heavy with meaning. Or you can stay. Offer yourself in her place. Daskia respects sacrifice. She might accept the trade. This isn't real. Mason finally gasped out. There has to be. But his words died as the creature before him shifted, and for just a second, the bark and moss fell away from its face. Harper looked back at him. Not all of Harper. The eyes were his sister's, that particular hazel green that matched his own. The bone structure was hers, the curve of her jaw. But the skin was wrong, too gray, with moss growing in patches along her cheeks. Her mouth opened, and instead of teeth, there were thorns. "Mason," she said, and her voice was Harper's voice underwater. Harper's voice filled with soil and roots. "Mason, run." Then the bark shroud fell back across her face, and it turned and walked back toward the cedar grove, moving with that impossible fluid grace. Harper's backpack slipped from Mason's numb fingers. "The choice is yours," the old woman said, and when Mason looked for her, she was gone. Only her voice remained, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "But choose quickly. Daskia's patience has limits." Mason didn't remember getting back to the river. One moment he was lying on the forest floor, his mind fractured into pieces by what he'd seen, and the next he was kneeling on the near bank, his boots soaked, his phone somehow in his hand again. It showed 6:47 p.m. He'd lost hours. His rational mind tried desperately to reassemble itself. Hallucination. Drug exposure. There were mushrooms everywhere in that forest. Some could be psychoactive if touched. That would explain. But Harper's backpack was still slung over his shoulder. He could feel its weight, could see the pins she'd collected. When he opened it with trembling hands, he found her research notebook, her camera, her water bottle. All real. All solid. Inside the notebook, on the last page she'd written, there was a new entry. The handwriting was Harper's, but it looked wrong. Shaky. Some letters backwards, as if her hand had forgotten how to form them correctly. "Mason, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. I was wrong. So wrong. The stories aren't metaphors. They're warnings. I crossed the boundary. I took what wasn't mine. I photographed what shouldn't be seen. She came for me on the second night. At first I thought she was just a woman in the woods, but then I saw her basket, saw what was inside, bones and moss and things that used to be people. She touched me with her wooden fingers, and I felt the forest growing inside me, roots in my veins, cedar bark under my skin. By the time you find this, I won't be Harper anymore. Not entirely. She's changing me, Mason. Making me part of the forest, part of her collection. I can feel memories that aren't mine. Other people she's taken, other offerings. Decades of them. Centuries, maybe. Don't try to save me. You can't. This place operates on different rules. Old rules. She only takes what's freely given now. That's how the old compact works. But I violated her territory, broke her peace, so she took me as payment. But you could still leave. Forget you saw anything. Forget me. It would be easier than knowing the truth. That the world is stranger and more terrible than you ever believed. That your science and rationality are just thin walls we build to keep out the dark. That there are things in these forests older than human understanding. I'm so sorry I didn't listen to the warnings. I'm sorry I made you come looking for me. I'm sorry you had to see what I've become. Run, Mason, while you still can. H. The handwriting grew increasingly erratic toward the end, the final letters barely legible. Mason's hand shook so badly he nearly dropped the notebook. This was in Harper's handwriting, her distinctive way of crossing her T's, the slight leftward slant she'd had since childhood. But it described something impossible, something his training and education insisted couldn't exist. Yet he'd seen her, seen what she'd become. The walk back to his main camp passed in a daze. Full darkness had fallen, and Mason moved by flashlight, jumping at every sound. The forest that had seemed merely indifferent before now felt actively hostile, watching, waiting to see what he would choose. At his tent, he found his satellite phone working again. One call. He could call for help, get extracted, tell the rangers. What? That his sister had been taken by a mythological creature and transformed into a forest spirit. They'd think he'd had a breakdown. Maybe he had. But the backpack was real. The notebook was real. Harper's transformation had been real. Mason sat beside his dying campfire, staring into the coals, and faced a choice that no amount of scientific training had prepared him for. He could leave, walk out in the morning, tell them Harper was lost, gone, dead probably. Except that some mysteries couldn't be solved. Some disappearances had no rational explanation. Return to his life, his work, his carefully constructed world of measurable facts and testable hypotheses. Or he could go back, offer himself as Daskia wanted, maybe save Harper, maybe just become another addition to her collection. Sacrifice his life, his rationality, everything he'd built his identity on, for a sister who was already half forest and might be beyond saving. What would a scientist do? What would a brother do? The answer, he realized with growing horror, was different for each. He spent the night not sleeping, watching the darkness beyond his firelight, and occasionally thought he saw shapes moving between the trees. Tall shapes. Sometimes they looked like Harper. Sometimes they looked like nothing human at all. By dawn, Mason had made his decision. The ranger station seemed impossibly bright and solid after days in the forest's twilight. Ranger Ortiz looked up as Mason entered, and something in her face told him she'd expected him to look exactly like he did. Hollow-eyed, haunted, fundamentally changed. "Dr. Reeves," she said quietly. "Your sister?" "Gone." The word came out flat. "I searched everywhere her GPS indicated. Found her camp, her notes, no sign of her, I think." He forced the lie out. "I think she might have fallen in the river. The current's strong there. By now." Ortiz nodded slowly. She didn't look surprised. "I'll file the report. We'll send teams to search downstream, but after this long, the chances—" She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Mason placed Harper's backpack on her desk. "I found this near the North Fork. Thought it might be useful for closure, for our family." "I'm very sorry for your loss." Mason nodded, not trusting himself to speak. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Ranger Ortiz? Those stories you told me about Daskia, do you believe them?" She met his eyes for a long moment. "My grandmother saw her once when she was young. Crossed the boundary stones looking for a lost dog. She said the basket woman let her go with a warning. Respect the forest, respect the old places, or the forest will take what it's owed." Ortiz's expression was unreadable. "My grandmother never went into the deep woods again. Lived to be 93. Did she ever see her dog again?" "No. But sometimes," she said, "on quiet nights she could hear it barking from somewhere deep in the trees. Still alive after all those years. But not a dog anymore. Not entirely." Mason felt his stomach twist. He nodded once and left. The drive down the mountain took hours. Mason kept his eyes on the road, didn't let himself look at the vast green expanse of the Olympic National Forest, stretching out on all sides. Thousands of acres of old growth, of places humans rarely ventured, of darkness and mystery that predated civilization. His phone buzzed as he reached the main highway, signal returning, the modern world reasserting itself. Emails, messages, the normal noise of human life. It all seemed distant now, like watching a movie of someone else's existence. He'd made his choice, the scientist's choice, not the brother's. He'd chosen his own survival, his own sanity, his own carefully rational understanding of how the world worked. He'd chosen to leave Harper to whatever transformation was consuming her, to let her become another victim of the forest, another entry in the long list of people who disappeared into the wilderness and were never found. It was the sane choice, the rational choice. It was also, he knew with absolute certainty, the choice he would regret for the rest of his life. But he drove on, down the mountain, away from the dark trees and the deeper darkness they concealed. Behind him, the Olympic National Forest stretched vast and patient, and somewhere in those depths, past the boundary stones and the old cedar grove, past the point where human rules applied, his sister was becoming something else, something that served the forest, something that belonged to Daskia. 3 weeks later, Mason sat in his apartment in Seattle, staring at a bottle of whiskey and trying to convince himself to drink it. His department head at the university had been sympathetic about his family emergency, had given him leave. His colleagues had sent condolences about Harper. The official report listed her as presumed drowned, her body never recovered. They'd held a memorial service. Their father had flown in from California, old and grief-stricken. "At least you tried," he'd told Mason. "At least you went looking for her." Mason hadn't told him what he'd found. He couldn't eat, couldn't sleep more than a few hours before waking with the image of Harper's transformed face seared into his mind. Couldn't concentrate on his work, his research, the comfortable world of empirical facts that had once been his refuge. Because facts were useless now. Facts couldn't explain what he'd seen. Facts couldn't tell him whether he'd made the right choice or the coward's choice. Facts couldn't answer the question that tormented him every night. Was Harper still in there, somewhere inside that bark-covered form, aware and suffering? His phone buzzed. Unknown number. Mason almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. Static at first. Then, underneath it, a sound that might have been breathing, or might have been wind through trees. "Mason." Harper's voice, distant and strange. "Mason, I understand now. Why you left. Why you chose yourself. The old woman, she's not separate from Daskia. She is Daskia, the part of her that can still speak. She offered you a choice you couldn't really make. Because you're still human. Still rational, still sane." "Harper." His voice broke. "Harper, is it really you?" "Some of me. Enough. Listen. She wants you to know something. The choice is still open. It's always open. If you ever want to come back, cross the boundary stones again, offer yourself. She'll accept. She'll take you into the forest and make you something new, something beyond pain and doubt and human weakness. She'll make you part of something old and vast and eternal. I can't. I can't give up everything I am. I know. That's why I'm calling. To tell you it's okay. To release you from the guilt." Harper's voice was fading, growing fainter. "But also to warn you. Because I can see more now, Mason. I can see how the roots spread, how the forest grows. And I can see that you're marked. Just by crossing the boundary, just by seeing her, you've been touched by the old world. You can go back to your life, back to your science, and your rationality. But part of you will always be here. Part of you will always remember. Part of you will always wonder if you made the right choice." The call ended. When Mason tried to call back, the number was invalid. He sat in his dark apartment, the whiskey still untouched, and understood that this was his punishment. Not death, not transformation, but knowledge. The certain knowledge that the world was stranger and more terrible than he'd believed. That his sister was something other than human now. That he'd chosen to save himself and abandon her. And that the choice would haunt him every day for the rest of his life. Outside his window, Seattle glowed with electric light, a city of concrete and glass and human certainty. But beyond the city, beyond the highways and the suburbs, the forest waited, ancient and patient and hungry, always waiting, always remembering. And sometimes, on very quiet nights when the city noise died down, Mason swore he could hear it, the faint rustle of cedar bark, the whisper of roots growing, his sister's voice calling from somewhere deep in the darkness. "Come back," it seemed to say. "The choice is still open, it's always open." But Mason never went back. He lived with his choice, and his guilt, and the slow poison of knowing that Harper was still out there, transformed but aware, part of the forest's eternal collection. He lived with the knowledge that rationality and science couldn't save him from the truth, that there were forces older than human understanding, that some stories weren't metaphors but warnings, that crossing certain boundaries changed you in ways you could never undo. He lived, and living, he discovered, could be its own kind of horror. If this story gave you chills, consider following for more quality terror. Could you have made a different choice than Mason? Years later, rangers still report strange occurrences in the Olympic National Forest's northern reaches. Hikers describe seeing a tall figure moving through the trees near the old cedar grove. Sometimes it looks like a woman covered in bark and moss. Sometimes it looks almost human. The Quinault elders know better than to go near the boundary stones. They tell their children the old stories and trust that some warnings don't need updating. In Seattle, Mason Reeves teaches biology at the university. He's well respected, published, successful by any objective measure. But his students sometimes notice that he never teaches courses requiring fieldwork in forests, that he seems uncomfortable with silence, that he keeps his office lights on even during the day. They don't know that he still gets calls sometimes in the dead of night from numbers that don't exist. They don't know about the choice he made, or the sister he left behind, or the thing she became. Some knowledge, he's learned, is too dangerous to share. Some truths are better left in the darkness where they belong. The forest keeps its secrets and Mason Reeves keeps his. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror rooted in authentic folklore, consider following. Which moment scared you most? The transformation, the choice, or the aftermath? The call came through at 4:47 a.m. on February 3, 2017, pulling Charlotte Reed from a dreamless sleep in her Houghton apartment. SAR coordinator dispatch, the voice clipped and professional, reporting a missing person on Isle Royale. 72 hours overdue. Solo researcher. Winter conditions. She was on the 6 a.m. ferry whether she liked it or not. Charlotte did like it, actually. She'd spent 8 years with Michigan Search and Rescue, the last 3 as lead analyst, and winter extractions were her specialty. While other team members relied on gut instinct and folklore-tinged intuition, she trusted data, weather patterns, hypothermia timelines, statistical probability maps. Her success rate spoke for itself: 43 successful recoveries, 0 losses. Mathematics didn't lie. The crossing to Isle Royale took 3 hours through choppy, ice-choked waters. Charlotte spent the time reviewing the case file on her laptop, methodically building her mental model. Daniel Hawthorne, 31, wildlife biologist from the University of Minnesota, studying wolf-moose population dynamics. Last contact February 1st via satellite phone, reporting he'd tracked a wolf pack to the island's northeastern quadrant. His research partner, Dr. Sarah Chen, had grown concerned when Daniel missed 2 scheduled check-ins. Standard protocol demanded a 72-hour wait before initiating SAR operations, but Chen had political connections, hence Charlotte's pre-dawn wake-up call. The data painted a clear picture. Daniel had 17 years of wilderness experience, military survival training, and top-tier equipment. His GPS tracker showed his last known position near Siskiwit Lake, 6 miles inland through dense boreal forest. Current temperature, -18 Fahrenheit, wind chill -35. Sunset at 5:47 p.m. She had 13 hours of usable daylight. Charlotte disembarked at Rock Harbor with her gear: GPS unit, satellite communicator, first aid pack, emergency bivy, chemical heat packs, and her standard issue Glock 22. The island in February was a study in hostile beauty. Ancient spruce and birch draped in snow, frozen Lake Superior extending to the horizon like hammered steel. The ranger station stood empty, even the permanent staff evacuated during the deep winter months. She was alone with approximately 200 square miles of wilderness and whatever remained of Daniel Hawthorne. She began hiking at 9:23 a.m. following Daniel's GPS trail. The first 3 miles revealed nothing unusual. His tracks were still visible in places where wind hadn't scoured the snow clean. Size 11 boot prints, steady gait, purposeful direction. Charlotte logged each observation in her digital recorder, building her timeline. Daniel had been moving northeast, following the shoreline initially before cutting inland. Textbook wolf tracking behavior. The first anomaly appeared at mile marker 4. Daniel's track simply stopped. Not faded, not blown away, stopped. Mid-stride, his left boot print clearly visible, then nothing. Charlotte crouched, studying the snow with her trained eye. No signs of a fall, no disruption in the surrounding powder, no blood spatter. Just absence where continuation should exist. She marked the GPS coordinates, photographed the scene, and expanded her search radius in concentric circles. 40 feet to the west, she found the tracks again. Same boot print, same gait pattern, but the direction had changed by roughly 60 degrees. Charlotte frowned. The analytical part of her mind, the part that had earned her a mathematics degree before joining SAR, immediately began calculating explanations. Disorientation from hypothermia? Possible, but the stride length remained consistent, suggesting full motor control. Deliberate evasion? Of what? She continued northeast, following the resumed trail. Her unease grew with each mile. The forest felt wrong in ways she couldn't quantify. The silence was too complete. No bird calls, no small mammal rustling, not even wind through the branches. Isle Royale in winter was never bustling with life, but this absence felt intentional, as if the forest itself held its breath. At 12:34 p.m., Charlotte found Daniel's campsite. The tent stood intact, its bright orange fabric a wound against the white landscape. The entrance flap hung open, moving slightly in the windless air. Charlotte approached with her sidearm drawn, calling out according to protocol. No response. She documented the scene with photographs before investigation, standard procedure that her rational mind insisted upon, even as her instincts screamed warnings. The tent's interior was chaos. Daniel's sleeping bag lay shredded, down feathers scattered like snow within snow. His satellite phone sat on the ground, screen cracked but still functional. Charlotte powered it on. The last outgoing message, timestamped 11:47 p.m. on February 1st, read, "Something wrong with the wolves. Not moving right. Sarah, if you get this..." The message cut off mid-sentence. His research notes lay scattered across the tent floor. Charlotte gathered them, her analyst's mind cataloging details. The handwriting deteriorated across the pages, from neat field observations to increasingly erratic scrawls. The early entries were standard wildlife documentation: wolf pack behavior, hunting patterns, territory markers. Then, on January 31st, pack refuses to feed on moose kill. Third carcass they've abandoned. Unusual vocalizations, not howls exactly, more like screaming. February 1st morning. The tracks are wrong. Measured stride length, 8 to 9 feet between prints. Wolves don't move like that. Wolves don't move like that. February 1st afternoon. Found something near the old mining camp. Bones arranged in patterns. Not natural, not animal behavior. Someone or something is still here. The final entry, barely legible. It walks on 2 legs now. I can hear it breathing outside the tent. So hungry. It's always been so hungry. The Algonquian were right about... The text dissolved into illegible scratches. Charlotte's hands trembled as she photographed each page. Her training screamed that this was psychological breakdown, hypothermia-induced psychosis, classic symptoms of severe exposure. But the methodical part of her mind, the part that worshipped data, noted discrepancies. The handwriting changed, yes, but the observational detail remained sharp until the very end. These weren't the ramblings of a hypothermic mind losing coherence. They were the increasingly desperate notes of someone documenting something impossible. She forced herself to continue the search. Daniel's equipment lay scattered around the campsite. GPS unit smashed, rifle missing, supply pack torn open with food containers scattered and unused. Most telling, his emergency beacon remained in its case, unactivated. If Daniel had been in his right mind, the beacon would have been the first thing he reached for. The trail led away from camp, but these tracks were different. Barefoot prints in the snow, impossibly long strides, the impressions too deep for a man of Daniel's weight. Charlotte followed them northeast for a quarter mile before they disappeared entirely at the edge of a frozen creek. On the far bank, she found the first blood. Not a small amount. A wide spray pattern across the snow and tree bark, dark arterial red already crystallizing in the cold. Charlotte's stomach clenched. She'd seen enough trauma scenes to estimate volume. At least 2 liters, probably more. No one survived losing that much blood in these conditions. But there was no body, no drag marks, no sign of predation. Just blood, and beyond it, those impossible tracks resuming. Now they looked different. The gait irregular, sometimes on 2 legs, sometimes 4. The stride length varying between 6 and 12 feet. Charlotte checked her watch. 2:17 p.m. 3.5 hours of daylight remaining. Her training said she should mark the location, retreat to the ranger station, call for backup and a full forensic team. But the island was cut off. The ferry wouldn't run again until tomorrow morning at earliest. and weather reports predicted a storm system moving in tonight. If Daniel was somehow still alive, these were his final hours. She continued tracking. The forest changed as she moved deeper inland. The trees grew more twisted, their branches reaching at wrong angles. Snow gathered in patterns that defied the wind. Charlotte's rational mind noted these details while simultaneously inventing explanations. Unusual geological formations affecting growth patterns, local microclimates creating odd snowdrifts. But beneath that comfortable analysis, a more primitive awareness whispered that she was entering a place where natural laws held less authority. At 3:45 p.m., she found the mining camp Daniel had mentioned. The structures dated from the 1870s, when copper operations briefly flourished on Isle Royale. Now only foundations remained, stone walls jutting from the snow like broken teeth. And the bones. They were arranged in a spiral pattern radiating from the camp's center, each piece carefully placed. Charlotte recognized moose skulls, wolf vertebrae, smaller mammals she couldn't immediately identify. But the pattern itself held her attention. It was too deliberate, too geometric. She'd seen enough animal behavior to know predators didn't do this. This required intention, symbolism, understanding. Her hands shook as she photographed the spiral. The angle of light revealed something else. Older bones beneath the recent ones, stained and weathered, some clearly decades old. This wasn't a new phenomenon. Something had been leaving offerings here for a very long time. Among the bones, she found items of human origin. A rusted hunting knife from the 1940s, its handle carved with symbols she didn't recognize. A leather journal so old it crumbled at her touch, but she could make out one repeated word on the surviving pages: Wendigo. And most disturbing, a wedding ring, modern, inscribed inside. James and Maria, 1989. Charlotte's radio crackled, static only, the distance and terrain too severe for clear communication. But within the static she heard something else. A voice, possibly, or something that could pass for a voice if you weren't listening carefully. It sounded like words shaped by a throat that had forgotten human speech, struggling with syllables that belonged to a language older than English, older than any European tongue that had reached these shores. The temperature dropped suddenly, precipitously. Charlotte's breath became visible in great plumes, then began to crystallize in the air itself. Her thermometer read -43 Fahrenheit, 15 degrees lower than it had been 5 minutes ago, physically impossible in the absence of weather system movement. The breathing started then, not wind through branches. Charlotte knew that sound intimately. This was rhythmic, purposeful, the respiration of something large moving through the forest. It came from all directions simultaneously, or perhaps the acoustic properties of the frozen landscape were playing tricks. She spun, sidearm raised, seeing nothing but darkening trees and gathering shadows. The sun was setting. She had perhaps 30 minutes of useful light remaining. Charlotte made the decision every SAR professional dreads. She would shelter here tonight, in these ruins, and resume tracking at first light. The alternative, attempting a 6-mile night hike through hostile terrain while something stalked her, was statistically suicidal. She activated her emergency beacon, knowing the signal would bring help by tomorrow afternoon at latest. She erected her bivvy against one of the sturdier foundation walls, gathered firewood, and prepared for a long night. Her rational mind insisted on procedure, on survival protocols, on maintaining the fiction that this was simply a difficult extraction in challenging conditions. But her hands trembled as she struck the fire, and she found herself arranging her spare equipment in patterns around her shelter, an unconscious echo of the bone spiral, as if primitive instinct understood protective symbolism better than her educated consciousness. Full darkness came at 6:23 p.m. The forest transformed. The breathing grew louder, circling her position. With it came sounds that violated her understanding of acoustic physics, wolf howls that harmonized impossibly, suggesting not a pack but a single throat capable of multiple simultaneous vocalizations. Footsteps that crunched through snow with weight that should break through the frozen earth itself. And underneath it all, a constant scratching, like fingernails on bark, coming from the trees themselves. Charlotte maintained her fire, feeding it obsessively. She'd read Daniel's notes. She understood, intellectually, what they suggested. The Ojibwe and other Algonquian peoples had stories about the Wendigo, a cannibalistic spirit born of desperate hunger, of humans who consumed human flesh during winter starvation. The creature was always hungry, never satisfied, growing more skeletal even as it fed. It was said to possess the ability to mimic voices, to move with impossible speed, to drive its victims to madness before consumption. Folklore, her rational mind insisted, cultural explanations for winter psychosis, for the genuine psychological horrors of starvation and isolation. Not real. Never real. But the bones in the spiral were real. The blood spray was real. Daniel's deteriorating notes were real. And the thing circling her shelter was most definitely real. At 9:37 p.m. it spoke. Charlotte. Her own voice, perfectly replicated, coming from the darkness beyond her fire's reach. Charlotte, I found him. Daniel's alive. You need to come quickly. She didn't move. Couldn't move. The voice was flawless. Her own accent, her own vocal patterns, even the slight rasp she developed when stressed. She watched the darkness, firearm in hand, and said nothing. Charlotte, please. Now it was Daniel's voice, weak and pained. I'm hurt, I can't move. Please help me. Please. The analytical part of her mind noted. The thing was testing her, learning what might draw her out. It had studied human behavior, understood vulnerability and compassion, perhaps from past victims, perhaps from centuries of them. I know what you are, Charlotte said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The mathematics of survival were clear now, stripped of comforting denial. You were human once. The Ojibwe called you Windigo. The Cree said Weetikau. You violated the sacred laws, ate human flesh during the starving time. Now you're never satisfied, never full. Just hunger wearing a human shape. The breathing stopped. Complete silence pressed down like physical weight. When the response came, it wasn't in any voice she recognized. It was the sound of winter wind through a dead man's ribs, of ice cracking across a frozen lake, of starvation made audible. Hungry. The word stretched across impossible syllables. Always hungry. You understand now? Good. She understood too before I ate her. Maria, in 1989, she fought. But the hunger never stops. Charlotte's mind processed the confession without emotion, filing it away with the ring she'd found. How many victims had there been? How many researchers, hikers, rangers who disappeared on Isle Royale over the decades? Their deaths attributed to natural causes, to the brutal mathematics of cold and isolation? Daniel, she asked, already knowing the answer. 3 days passed. Fed, but not satisfied. Never satisfied. You next. You smell like fear now, not certainty. I can taste the doubt in your breath. You came seeking logic, found only hunger. At 11:04 p.m., it showed itself. The firelight caught movement at the edge of visibility. Something that had been standing motionless in the shadows, now stepping forward. Charlotte's mind tried to categorize what she saw and failed catastrophically. Her education insisted this was impossible. Her eyes reported differently. It stood between 8 and 9 feet tall, skeletal to the point of anatomical impossibility. Skin pulled gray and tight over bones that seemed too long, too angular to be mammalian. The face retained human features, but stretched and wrong, the mouth too wide and filled with teeth that had never been meant for an omnivorous jaw. The eyes were the worst, not black or empty, but aware and intelligent, holding the accumulated wisdom of predation. What destroyed Charlotte's final defenses wasn't the creature's appearance. The mind could rationalize that as disease or mutation. What broke her was the recognition in those eyes. It knew exactly what it was. It understood its own monstrousness, and it accepted that understanding with something approaching satisfaction. The Wendigo tilted its head, mimicking curiosity. When it spoke now, It used no recognizable voice, just that terrible acoustic wrongness that suggested language processed through a throat that had evolved beyond human limitations. You count, always counting. Temperatures, distances, probabilities, numbers comfort you. It took a step closer. Charlotte fired 3 rounds center mass. The creature didn't flinch. Calculate this. How long does a human survive at -47 Fahrenheit without shelter? How many hours until hypothermia induces hallucination? Is this real, Charlotte who counts? Or merely your educated mind breaking? Her thermometer confirmed the temperature, -47 and dropping. The fire should be providing more warmth, but cold pressed in from all directions, unnatural and purposeful. The Wendigo controlled it somehow, or perhaps was so fundamentally cold that it drew heat from the environment like a thermal vampire. I was a man once, it continued, circling her shelter with movements too fluid for its skeletal structure. 1873. Copper mining. Winter trapped us. Food ran out. I was the foreman, 32 men under my care. I made the choice, fed them to the others one by one, kept us alive until spring, thought I was strong. It laughed, a sound like ice sheets grinding. The Ojibwe knew better. Old woman from Bad River Reservation, she saw what I'd become. Spoke the old words, told me what I was now. Windigo, the hunger that walks. She said the change was permanent. She was right. Charlotte's fire flickered and dimmed despite fresh wood. The cold intensified, a living thing with intention. Her fingers were losing sensation. The mathematics of survival shifted. She had perhaps 4 hours before severe hypothermia set in, less if the supernatural cold accelerated the process. Her emergency beacon was transmitting, but help wouldn't arrive until tomorrow at earliest. The equation was simple and brutal. She could not last that long. Tell me, woman of numbers, the Wendigo whispered, now somewhere behind her. If consciousness is merely neural patterns, electrochemical reactions, algorithmic processes, what am I? I died in 1874, starved and froze while full of human meat. Yet here I remain. Calculate that probability. At 1:33 a.m., Charlotte made her decision. She had enough chemical heat packs to keep her core temperature stable for perhaps 6 more hours if she rationed carefully. The fire was dying despite her efforts. Something about the Wendigo's presence actively suppressed thermal energy. She had ammunition, but ballistics clearly didn't apply to something that had been dead for 143 years. Her radio produced only that terrible static voice speaking syllables that might have been Ojibwe, or might have been older still. But she had data. Daniel's notes, the bone spiral, the historical pattern of disappearances. And she had the training to document her findings even as her probability of survival approached 0. Charlotte activated her digital recorder and began speaking, methodical and clear, creating the case file that would outlive her. She documented everything, the impossible tracks, the blood spray, the mining camp spiral, Daniel's research, the wedding ring, and finally the Wendigo itself. She described its appearance in precise detail, its behavior, its claims. She spoke for 47 minutes until her voice grew hoarse and the cold made speech difficult. The Wendigo listened without interrupting, and when she finished, it spoke again. You believe now. Not want to, but cannot deny. Your numbers don't work here. This place, it's thin. The barrier between what you call real and what your ancestors knew was real, it's thin here. Always has been. That's why the copper miners failed. That's why the Ojibwe avoided this place in winter. They knew. It circled closer, now barely 10 feet from her failing fire. Charlotte could see it fully, the emaciated body, the 2 long limbs, the face that retained just enough humanity to make its monstrousness more profound. She raised her sidearm one more time, knowing it was futile, unable to stop her training from demanding action. Shoot if it comforts you, the Wendigo said. I don't mind. The missionaries shot me in 1891. The Rangers shot me in 1967. The bullets passed through. I'm not here, not really. Just an echo of hunger. Just winter's memory of what men become. Charlotte fired. The Wendigo smiled with too many teeth. At 4:16 a.m., her thermometer read -61 Fahrenheit. Her chemical heat packs had expired. Her fire was embers. The cold had progressed beyond physical discomfort into a strange warmth, the first stage of severe hypothermia, her educated mind noted. When the body begins shutting down peripheral functions to protect the core, soon would come confusion, then loss of consciousness, then cardiac arrest. The mathematics were clear. She wondered if Daniel had calculated his own death this way, measuring his decline in degrees and minutes. If he'd maintained his analytical mind until the end, or if terror had finally broken through. The Wendigo sat across from her dying fire, close enough now that she could see its breath crystallizing in the air. Except it didn't breathe, not really. The rise and fall of its chest was mimicry, a memory of when it had been human and lungs had held purpose. "I could kill you quickly," it said, almost conversational now. "But I won't. You interest me. 143 years, and you're the first to understand. To see me clearly and still try to document, to categorize, to add me to your database of knowable things." Charlotte's recorder was still running, battery somehow maintaining charge despite the impossible cold. She managed to speak through numb lips. "What do you want?" "Want?" The Wendigo considered this. "I want to stop being hungry. I want winter to end. I want to be the man I was before I ate my friends. But wanting changes nothing. I am what I am. Hunger in the shape of memory. And you are food that thinks." It stood, unfolding to its full, terrible height. "But I will give you a choice. It's more than I gave the others. You can freeze here slowly, your rational mind maintaining clarity until the end. Document your death scientifically. Or you can run. Try to make the 6 miles back to Rock Harbor. I'll follow. I'll catch you. I always do. But you'll die moving, fighting, refusing to accept the impossible even as it consumes you. Which fate does your mathematical mind prefer?" Charlotte checked her watch. 4:31 a.m. Sunrise at 7:42. 3 hours and 11 minutes. The ferry wouldn't arrive until afternoon at earliest. The equation was impossible to balance. She looked at the bone spiral, at the evidence of decades of victims, at the wedding ring lying in the snow. She thought about Daniel, alone and terrified, his analytical mind breaking as it confronted something that violated every law he understood. She thought about Maria from 1989 and James, who probably still wondered what happened to his wife, about the 32 miners who'd trusted their foreman to keep them alive. The Wendigo waited with infinite patience. It had time. It always had time. Charlotte stood, her legs barely supporting her weight. The cold had progressed beyond pain into absence, her extremities losing feeling. She had 3 chemical heat packs left and a digital recorder with 2 hours of battery life remaining. She checked her sidearm. 9 rounds. "I'm going to walk out," she said, each word requiring conscious effort. "I'm going to document every step. And when they find my body, they'll find the evidence. Someone will believe. Someone will understand. This island needs to be quarantined, studied. You need to be..." She paused, unable to finish. "How did you stop something that was already dead? How did you fight hunger made manifest?" The Wendigo laughed, that terrible grinding sound. "They won't believe. They'll say hypothermia, psychosis, tragic accident. They'll explain away the evidence, rationalize the impossible, like you did, until you couldn't anymore. But go. Run your experiment. Test your mathematics against winter and hunger. I'll be right behind you." Charlotte began walking at 4:47 a.m., her GPS tracking her progress. She didn't run. Running would accelerate heat loss and exhaust her limited energy reserves. She maintained a steady pace, methodical and measured, documenting observations into her recorder as she moved. Behind her, the breathing resumed. Steady, purposeful, never closer, but never farther. The Wendigo followed as promised, a patient predator, allowing its prey the fiction of escape. Mile 1. Charlotte's core temperature had dropped to 94 degrees Fahrenheit. Mild hypothermia, causing confusion and loss of coordination. She stumbled frequently, catching herself on trees that felt somehow aware, hostile in their indifference. Mile 2. The impossible tracks appeared beside her own, sometimes human, sometimes wolf, sometimes something between. The Wendigo circled her route, appearing in her peripheral vision as flickers of movement that vanished when she looked directly. Mile 3. Full sunrise should have brought warmth and visibility. Instead, the light was gray and thin, as if filtered through infinite distance. Charlotte's recorder picked up sounds that shouldn't exist, chanting in languages that predated English by millennia, drums that had no source, the screaming of men dying of starvation. The island was sharing its memories, or perhaps the Wendigo was projecting them, showing her the accumulation of winter horror that had soaked into this place. Mile 4. Charlotte fell, her legs finally failing. She lay in the snow, watching her breath crystallize, and understood that this was where her mathematics ended. Her training, her education, her faith in quantifiable reality, all of it insufficient against something that existed outside natural law. The Wendigo emerged from the tree line, taking its time. It approached until it loomed over her, and Charlotte saw her own reflection in its eyes, a small, fragile thing made of meat and warmth, already dying. 17 minutes, it said. That's how long you have until cardiac arrest. You fought well. Lasted longer than Daniel. He ran, you see. Sprinted in blind panic, burned through his energy reserves in the first mile. Found him still alive. Barely. He begged. Offered everything. Money. Worship. His soul, if such things existed. I ate him anyway. Charlotte's hand found her sidearm. 9 rounds. She raised it with the last of her strength, not aiming at the creature. What would be the point? But at her own temple, at least she could deny it the satisfaction. At least she could die on her own terms. The Wendigo moved faster than thought, wrenching the gun from her grip. No, you don't choose. That's the last lesson. You're prey. Prey doesn't choose. It knelt beside her impossibly close, and Charlotte saw that its eyes held something beyond hunger. They held sorrow. Ancient, endless sorrow for what it had been and could never be again. I'm sorry, it whispered. And for a moment the voice was human. A man's voice colored by 19th century Cornish accent, rough with exhaustion and despair. I didn't want this. Didn't want any of it. But hunger doesn't care what you want. It just is. The last thing Charlotte recorded was not her own death. The battery died at 6:03 a.m. 3 miles from Rock Harbor, her core temperature at 89 degrees. But the recorder captured 47 seconds of audio that would later be analyzed by specialists, debated in closed forums, and ultimately classified. It was the sound of something feeding. And underneath that, barely audible, the sound of something weeping. They found Charlotte Reed's body on February 6, 2017, when the storm cleared enough for the Coast Guard helicopter to reach Isle Royale. She lay 3 miles from Rock Harbor, her emergency beacon still transmitting. The official report listed cause of death as severe hypothermia, with contributing factors of exposure and possible disorientation. Her digital recorder was recovered, its contents documented and sealed. The SAR coordinator who reviewed the footage took early retirement 6 weeks later. He never explained why, but colleagues noted he wouldn't go into the woods anymore, not even in summer, not even in daylight. Daniel Hawthorne's body was never found. Neither was Charlotte's sidearm. The bone spiral at the old mining camp remained undisturbed, slowly gathering snow. Occasionally in winter, when conditions are right and the temperature drops below a certain threshold, Park Service monitors detect movement on Isle Royale's thermal cameras. Something large moving between the trees with a gait that suggests 2 legs, then 4, then something else entirely. The island is closed to visitors from November through April. The official reason is ice conditions and safety concerns. Rangers who've worked there know better, though they won't say so officially. They've seen the tracks that don't match any known animal. They've heard the breathing on quiet nights. They've found the arrangements of bones, year after year, always in the same spiral pattern. In 2019, a graduate student petitioned to study winter wolf behavior on Isle Royale. Her request was denied without explanation. In 2021, a documentary crew requested filming permits for the off-season. Denied. In 2023, a team of cryptozoologists offered funding for a winter expedition. The Park Service response was swift and absolute. No, some places are hungry. Isle Royale is one of them. And hunger, once awakened, never truly sleeps. It only waits, patient as winter, for the next person who believes they can explain away the impossible with mathematics and logic. The numbers don't add up. They never did. Some equations have no solution, only victims. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most? Tentar novamente. Isle Royale National Park, Michigan, February 2014. Christopher Hayes had spent 12 years as a ranger in Isle Royale, and he prided himself on knowing the difference between actual emergencies and tourist hysteria. The missing person report that crackled through his radio at 6:47 a.m. fell squarely into the former category. Olivia Chen, a wildlife researcher from the University of Minnesota, had missed her scheduled check-in for the third consecutive day. Her last known position was the remote northwest quadrant of the island, nearly 18 miles from the nearest maintained trail. The February cold hit like a physical blow when Christopher stepped outside the ranger station. -12 degrees, wind chill pushing it to -30. The kind of cold that turned exposed skin gray in minutes, that made your lungs ache with each breath. Isle Royale in winter was a different creature than the summer paradise tourists knew. The ferry service had stopped running in January. The island was essentially cut off from the mainland, home to perhaps 20 souls scattered across over 200 square miles of frozen wilderness. Olivia Chen had been studying the island's wolf population, tracking the pack's movement patterns through the brutal winter months. She was experienced, well-equipped, and by all accounts, cautious, which made her silence all the more concerning. Christopher loaded his snowmobile with methodical precision. Emergency medical kit, spare batteries, flares, rope, GPS unit, satellite phone. He added extra layers to his cold weather gear, checked his compass twice, and reviewed Olivia's last reported coordinates. The rational part of his brain, the part that had kept him alive through more than 100 winter rescues, ran through the probable scenarios. Equipment failure, injury preventing her from reaching her radio, disorientation during a whiteout. All serious, all survivable if he reached her quickly enough. He gunned the snowmobile north, following the frozen shoreline before cutting inland toward the dense pine forests that covered the island's interior. The morning sun was a pale disk behind gray clouds, offering light but no warmth. His breath crystallized instantly in the air. The landscape was monochromatic: white snow, black tree trunks, gray sky. Beautiful in a desolate way, but Christopher had learned long ago not to romanticize the wilderness. Nature wasn't cruel or kind. It simply was. Indifferent to human life, governed by laws as immutable as mathematics. 2 hours into the journey, he found Olivia's base camp. The tent was still standing, which was good. The front flap was open, snapping in the wind, which was not. Christopher killed the engine and approached on foot, his boots crunching through the crusty snow. His first thought was bears, but the island's black bears were hibernating. Wolves then, though they typically avoided human camps. He called out Olivia's name, his voice swallowed by the immense silence of the forest. The camp was in disarray. Olivia's sleeping bag had been dragged halfway out of the tent, its fabric torn. Food containers lay scattered in the snow, their contents frozen solid. Christopher's trained eye cataloged the scene with growing unease. The damage wasn't consistent with animal activity. Bears ransacked camps with purpose, seeking food. This looked frantic, chaotic. There was no blood, which was good, but also strange. If an animal had attacked, there would be blood. He found her research journal near the cold remains of a campfire. The entries were meticulous up until 3 days ago, documenting wolf sightings, temperature readings, and behavioral observations. Then the handwriting changed. The final entry, dated February 23rd, was barely legible. The wolves won't stop howling. Wrong direction, wrong sound. Something else out there. The old trapper was right. Should have listened. So hungry. Why am I so hungry? Christopher read it twice, frowning. Hypothermia could cause confusion, irrational behavior. But Olivia was experienced. Her shelter was intact. She had adequate supplies. What had driven her from the camp? He keyed his radio. "Base, this is Hayes. Located Chen's camp. Site is abandoned, signs of distress, no indication of her current position. Expanding search radius." "Static then." "Copy that, Hayes. Be advised, storm system moving in from the northwest. You've got maybe 6 hours before conditions deteriorate." Christopher acknowledged and began a systematic grid search around the camp. He found her radio 20 yards to the east, frozen in a snowbank. The battery was dead, but the casing showed no damage. She'd either dropped it or thrown it. Neither made sense. He marked the location on his GPS and continued searching. The tracks appeared 50 yards from camp, partially filled with wind-blown snow but still visible. Human prints, barefoot. Christopher stared at them for a long moment, his rational mind struggling to accept what he was seeing. No one went barefoot in negative-degree weather. It was suicide. Frostbite would set in within minutes, tissue death within an hour, yet the tracks were unmistakable, accompanied by drag marks suggesting an unsteady gait. He followed them into the forest. The prints led north, deeper into the old-growth pines where the canopy blocked most of the light. The temperature seemed to drop further under the trees, the air heavy with a profound stillness. Christopher's unease grew with each step, though he couldn't articulate why. The tracks were erratic, zigzagging between trees, sometimes circling back on themselves. He'd seen similar patterns from people suffering severe hypothermia, the paradoxical undressing, the terminal burrowing instinct. But something about these tracks felt different, purposeful in their chaos. After 30 minutes, he found the first marker. It was crude, built from stripped pine branches lashed together with what looked like dried sinew. The structure formed a rough triangle, about 3 feet tall, stuck in the snow like a warning sign. Christopher photographed it, his gloved fingers clumsy on the camera controls. Some kind of trail marker? But for what? The tracks continued past it, and he pressed on, increasingly aware of the diminishing daylight. More markers appeared as he went deeper. Different configurations, circles, spirals, stick figures with elongated limbs. They seemed deliberately placed along Olivia's route, as if she'd been following them, or had she made them? Christopher couldn't tell which possibility disturbed him more. The forest changed around him. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to form a tunnel of shadow. Snow had barely penetrated here, leaving exposed patches of frozen earth and dead leaves. The silence was absolute. No bird calls, no wind, nothing. Just his breathing and the crunch of his boots. He almost missed the shelter. It was built into a natural depression between 2 massive oak trees, constructed from branches and moss and what appeared to be strips of bark. Primitive, but effective. Christopher approached cautiously, noting the disturbing additions. More bones than before, arranged in patterns around the entrance. Skulls of small animals, rabbits, squirrels, a fox, stacked like offerings. The bones had been picked completely clean. "Olivia?" His voice sounded obscenely loud in the stillness. "Olivia Chen, this is Ranger Hayes. I'm here to help you." Movement inside the shelter. A rustling, then a low sound that might have been a whimper or a growl. Christopher's hand went to the radio on his belt, but he didn't key it. Not yet. He needed to assess the situation first. "I'm coming in, okay? Don't be alarmed." He ducked through the entrance, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The smell hit him first. Rot and copper and something sweetly putrid that made his stomach lurch. The beam found the back wall of the shelter, illuminating symbols carved deep into the bark. Not random marks, but deliberate patterns, repeated over and over. Spirals, concentric circles, crude representations of figures with antlers. Then the light found her. Olivia was pressed into the corner, knees drawn to her chest, rocking slowly. Her winter coat was gone, along with her boots and most of her clothing. Her exposed skin was mottled with frostbite, black and purple spreading like bruises. But she was alive, breathing, her eyes open and staring at nothing. Impossibly alive, despite exposure that should have killed her days ago. Jesus Christ. Christopher moved quickly, pulling the emergency blanket from his pack. Olivia, I'm going to get you warm. You're going to be okay. He draped the blanket over her shoulders, but she didn't seem to register his presence. Her lips moved soundlessly, forming words he couldn't hear. He checked her pulse, racing, far too fast. Her pupils were dilated, her skin fever-hot despite the frostbite. None of it made medical sense. Olivia, can you hear me? I need you to come with me. We need to get you to a hospital. Her head turned slowly toward him, and Christopher found himself looking into eyes that didn't quite focus. She smiled, and it was the smile of something that had forgotten how human expressions worked. So hungry, she whispered. Can't stop. Can't ever stop. When did you last eat? I have food. Not that kind of hunger. Her voice was barely human, more of a rasp. The old trapper told me, French word, wendigo, the hunger that walks. It's in the bones now, in the marrow, growing. Christopher's rational mind tried to dismiss it as hypothermic delirium, but something primal in his hindbrain was screaming. He'd heard the stories, of course. Everyone who worked the northern wilderness knew them. Algonquian legends about winter spirits, about people who turned cannibal and became something else. Monsters born from starvation and desperation. He'd always filed them alongside Bigfoot and UFOs. Cultural folklore, nothing more. We need to go, he said firmly, reaching for her arm. Olivia moved with impossible speed. Her hand clamped onto his wrist with crushing strength. Her nails, when had they gotten so long, digging into his thermal sleeve. Her face was inches from his and her breath smelled like spoiled meat. You don't understand, it's already happening, I can feel it changing me. The hunger hollows you out, makes room for something else. Her eyes were wild now, terrified and exhilarated at once. I can smell you, Christopher, your warmth, your flesh. Makes my mouth water. He jerked back, breaking her grip, and scrambled out of the shelter. His heart hammered against his ribs as he keyed the radio with shaking hands. Base, this is Hayes. I've located Chen. Medical emergency, possible severe hypothermia and psychological distress. I need emergency extraction. A howl cut through the forest, rising from somewhere to the north. Not a wolf's howl. Christopher had heard thousands of those. This was wrong, discordant, like a human scream stretched and distorted until it became something else entirely. The sound raised every hair on his body. It was answered by another howl from the east, then another from the south. They weren't wolves. They'd never been wolves. Christopher backed away from the shelter, his breath coming in rapid clouds. The rational explanations were crumbling. Hypothermia didn't give people supernatural strength. Starvation didn't make you smell blood from yards away, and there was no natural animal that made those sounds. Olivia emerged from the shelter, moving in a crouch that was almost quadrupedal. The blanket had fallen away, and Christopher could see the changes more clearly now. Her spine protruded through her skin, vertebrae standing in sharp relief. Her limbs were elongating, joints bending at subtly wrong angles. The frostbite wasn't killing her, it was transforming her. Run, she said, and for just a moment her voice was her own again. Human. Terrified. Please, Christopher. Run while I can still tell you to. He ran. The snowmobile was miles away, back at her original camp. Christopher crashed through the forest, his GPS unit clutched in one hand, the other holding his flashlight. The howls followed him, multiplying, coming from every direction now. How many were there? How many researchers and trappers and unlucky souls had the island claimed over the years, transforming them into these things? Branches whipped his face. Snow caught in his boots. His lungs burned with each breath of frigid air. The rational part of his brain had shut down completely, replaced by pure survival instinct. He could hear them behind him, moving through the forest with liquid grace, their footfalls impossibly light on the crusty snow. He burst into a small clearing and stumbled, going down hard on one knee. The flashlight flew from his hand, spinning across the snow. In its wild arc of light, he saw them. 3 figures at the edge of the clearing, their bodies twisted into shapes that hurt to look at, impossibly tall and impossibly thin, with skin drawn tight over protruding bones. Their faces were the worst part, stretched and distorted, jaws too large, filled with teeth that had grown sharp and numerous. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beam like an animal's, shining with hunger that went beyond mere starvation. Christopher grabbed his flashlight and ran again, changing direction, heading toward the sound of water. Lake Superior was frozen, but maybe he could reach the southern shore, find the ranger station, get to the radio tower. Something hit him from the side, driving him into a snowbank. He rolled, bringing up his arms to protect his face and throat, and found himself staring up at what had once been Olivia Chen. She straddled him, her weight impossibly light, her fingers, claws now, definitely claws, pressed against his chest. Her face hung inches above his, and he could see the last remnants of humanity draining from her features. The fever-bright eyes, the too wide smile, the black ichor dripping from her mouth. "I tried to warn them," she whispered. Old Henry, the trapper. He knew. Tried to tell me about the taboos, the winter rules. Don't hunt alone in February. Don't camp near the old sites. Never eat meat that tastes too sweet. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. But I was a scientist. I didn't believe in superstitions. "Olivia, fight it. You're still human." "No." She pressed down harder, and he felt his ribs creak. "That's the terrible part, Christopher. I'm not fighting it. The hunger takes everything, fear, love, memory, and fills the emptiness with itself. And it feels good. It feels right. Like I've been starving my whole life, and only now discovered what real satisfaction feels like." Her mouth opened wider than any human mouth should, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Christopher could feel her breath on his face, could smell the charnel reek of her. Then the gunshot cracked across the clearing. Olivia jerked back, a dark stain spreading across her chest. She looked down at it with something like confusion, then up toward the source of the shot. Christopher turned his head and saw him, an old man in traditional cold-weather gear, holding a rifle with one hand and what looked like a bundle of dried herbs in the other. "Get up, Ranger," the old man barked. "Now!" Christopher didn't need to be told twice. He scrambled to his feet as the old man fired again, this time at the other figures emerging from the trees. They shrieked, that horrible, distorted howl, and fell back into the shadows. "This way, quick!" The old man grabbed Christopher's arm and pulled him toward a barely visible path. They won't follow to the old site. Still enough of the traditional protections left. They ran together, the old man moving with surprising speed for his age. Behind them, the howls intensified, furious and frustrated. Christopher's mind reeled, trying to process what he'd just seen, trying to fit it into any framework that made sense. They broke through the trees into a small clearing dominated by a crude cabin. Symbols were carved into every surface. The same spirals and circles Christopher had seen in Olivia's shelter, but different somehow. Purposeful. Protective. The old man hustled him inside and barred the door with a heavy beam. "Henry Ashcroft," the old man said, extending a hand. "Retired trapper. You're lucky I was checking my lines." "What the hell was that thing?" Christopher's voice was shaking. What happened to her? Henry moved to the cabin's small stove and began brewing something that smelled of cedar and sage. Wendigo. Old hunger. Oldest hunger, maybe. The Ojibwe have known about it for centuries. It's what happens when people break the winter taboos, when they taste human flesh or let the hunger consume them completely. The spirit enters, takes root, transforms them into something that can never be satisfied. That's impossible. Christopher stopped because all the rational arguments had abandoned him. He'd seen it, felt it. How do you kill them? You don't. Not really. Fire helps, severs the spirit's connection. Silver too, if you believe the old stories. But mostly, you avoid them. Stay close to the protections. Wait for spring. Henry handed him a steaming mug. Drink this. It'll help with the shock. Christopher drank. The liquid was bitter but warming. Outside, the howls continued circling the cabin but coming no closer. How many are there? On the island? Maybe a dozen, maybe more. Accumulating over years. People go missing in winter, get desperate, break the rules. The hunger finds them. Most folks don't believe until it's too late. Henry settled into a chair, his rifle across his lap. I tried to warn that girl, the researcher. She thought I was just a superstitious old man. We have to get off the island. Radio for help. Radio's been dead for 3 days. Storm knocked out the tower. We're cut off until the thaw, probably March at the earliest. Henry met his eyes. I'm sorry, son. We're trapped here with them until spring. The reality settled over Christopher like ice water. 6 weeks. Minimum. Trapped on an island with creatures that had once been human, that wore the faces of the missing, that existed in defiance of every natural law he'd spent his life believing in. As if reading his thoughts, Henry said, "The hard part isn't accepting they exist. The hard part is understanding what they represent. The Wendigo isn't just a monster, Ranger. It's a spiritual disease. A reminder that we're all just a few bad choices away from becoming something monstrous. That civilization is thin ice over very deep water." Christopher moved to the window, peering through the gap in the shutters. He could see shapes moving in the tree line, tall and impossibly thin, their eyes reflecting the moonlight. One of them was Olivia, he was certain, close enough that he could still recognize what she'd been. The rational part of his brain, the part that had always trusted in facts and evidence, lay in ruins. He'd built his entire worldview on the assumption that reality followed comprehensible rules, that with enough data and analysis, anything could be understood and categorized, but some hungers couldn't be quantified. Some transformations couldn't be reversed. Some horrors were real, had always been real, waiting in the spaces between logic and firelight. He thought of Olivia's final warning, her desperate plea for him to run while she could still form human words. How long had she fought it? How long before the hunger consumed everything that made her who she was? "They'll be out there all night," Henry said quietly, "testing the barriers, waiting for us to make a mistake. Come spring, when the lake thaws and the ferry runs again, they'll retreat deeper into the island. Hibernate in the old places until next winter brings fresh desperation and fresh prey. And we just wait. We survive. That's all we can do." Christopher pulled back from the window and slumped against the wall. His hands were still shaking. Outside, the Wendigo howled, and now he could hear the hunger in that sound. Infinite, insatiable, eternal. The hunger that walks, the hunger that waits. He'd come to the island to rescue someone, but there was nothing left to rescue. Olivia Chen was gone, consumed by something that wore her shape like a poorly fitting coat. All that remained was to endure until spring, to carry the knowledge back to civilization that some things couldn't be explained away. Some things were simply hungry. The night stretched ahead, filled with sounds that shouldn't exist, stalked by creatures that defied taxonomy. Christopher Hayes, who had spent 12 years believing in the supremacy of rational thought, sat in a warded cabin and listened to the monsters howl, and understood finally that the wilderness he thought he knew had always been hiding its true face. That beneath the statistical models and ecological surveys lurked older truths, written in bone and blood, and endless winter hunger. He'd survived. For now. But something fundamental had broken in him, some firewall between the known world and the impossible. He would leave the island in March, when the ice finally broke. He would file reports and answer questions and try to explain the unexplainable. But he would never forget the weight of Olivia's body pinning him to the snow, or the hunger shining in eyes that had once been human, or the terrible moment when his entire worldview shattered like thin ice under too much weight. Some things he now knew couldn't be analyzed away. Some hungers were eternal, patient, waiting in the frozen places for civilization's certainties to falter. And Winter, that old teacher, was always willing to provide another lesson. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most? The phone call came at 2:47 a.m., pulling Jennifer from a sleep that had never been restful, not in the 3 years since Emma died. Her hand fumbled across the nightstand, knocking over the half-empty glass of wine she'd needed to even attempt rest. The screen showed Daniel's name, and her heart lurched with the particular dread that had become her constant companion since losing her daughter. The fear that everyone she loved was perpetually one moment away from vanishing. "Danny?" Her voice came out hoarse, thick with interrupted sleep and the wine. Static crackled through the speaker, so loud she had to pull the phone away from her ear. Beneath the white noise, she heard breathing, rapid, panicked, the sound of someone running. Then her brother's voice cut through, fragmented and distant. "Jen. Jesus Christ. Jen, you have to..." More static. "Following me. It's been following me for 2 days and I can't..." "Daniel, slow down. Where are you?" She was already out of bed, her bare feet cold on the hardwood floor of her Milwaukee apartment. "Are you still at Isle Royale?" He'd gone up to the national park 4 days ago, some winter camping trip he'd planned to clear his head after his girlfriend left him. Jennifer had tried to talk him out of it. February in Michigan's northernmost island park was brutal, dangerous for even experienced campers, but Daniel had always been stubborn. "It knows." His voice broke, and Jennifer realized with horror that her 28-year-old brother was crying. "It knows what you sound like. It's been calling to me in your voice, Jen. In Emma's voice." Ice flooded through Jennifer's veins. "What are you talking about?" "The Wendigo." He pronounced it carefully, reverently, like he was afraid to say it wrong. "The ranger who found me yesterday, he was Ojibwe. He saw the marks on the trees. He told me not to come back into the woods to get on the next ferry, but I lost the trail and now it's..." The static surged again. So violent, Jennifer heard something underneath it. Something that might have been wind, or might have been a voice. Then Daniel's scream tore through the white noise, high and piercing, and abruptly cut off. "Daniel! Daniel!" The line went dead. Jennifer stood in her dark bedroom, phone pressed so hard against her ear it hurt, and felt the familiar abyss yawning open inside her chest. Not again. She couldn't lose someone else. Not again. She called back immediately. It went straight to voicemail. She tried 6 more times over the next 10 minutes, pacing her apartment, that word her brother had said echoing in her mind. Wendigo. She grabbed her laptop with shaking hands and searched. The results made her stomach clench. Wendigo, Wendigo, Wendigo. Different spellings, same entity. A creature from Algonquian mythology. A cannibalistic spirit that possessed humans during harsh winters, drove them to murder and consume human flesh. The more she read, the worse it got. Once transformed, a Wendigo was eternally hungry, never satisfied no matter how much it ate. It grew taller with each victim, towering over the forest. It could mimic human voices perfectly, luring people into the woods. It was just folklore, she told herself. Indigenous legends. Daniel was probably hypothermic, hallucinating. She needed to call the park service, get them to search for him, but her hands were already pulling out her suitcase, her mind already planning the 8-hour drive to Copper Harbor, and the ferry that would take her across to Isle Royale. Because underneath her rational thoughts, in the place where grief lived, she heard Emma's voice from 3 years ago, weak and fading in the hospital. "Mommy, there's someone in the corner. He's so tall, and he looks so hungry." Jennifer had thought it was the morphine talking. The doctors said children often hallucinated near the end, but Emma had been staring at that corner with such fear in her dying eyes, and when Jennifer had finally looked, really looked, she'd seen shadows that shouldn't have been there, shadows that seemed to move with breath. She pushed the memory away viciously and kept packing. The drive north was a blur of gray highway and grayer sky. Jennifer stopped only once, at a gas station in Marquette, where an elderly native woman at the counter noticed her Isle Royale park map and frowned. "Going to the island in February? My brother's up there, he's missing." The woman's frown deepened. She said something in a language Jennifer didn't recognize, then switched to English. "The old ones say you shouldn't speak its name in winter. Draws attention." She leaned closer, her dark eyes sharp and serious. "If you see birch trees with the bark stripped in spirals, don't follow them. If you smell rot but there's nothing dead nearby, run. And if you hear voices calling you deeper into the woods, even if it sounds exactly like someone you love, it's lying. The Wendigo always lies." Jennifer wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as superstition, but the woman's intensity silenced her. She just nodded and paid for her gas. By the time she reached Copper Harbor, the sun was setting early behind iron-colored clouds. The ferry service manager, a weathered man named Tom, tried to refuse her passage. "Park's barely staffed this time of year. Got maybe 2 rangers on the whole island. Weather's supposed to get bad tonight. My brother called me at 3 this morning." Jennifer's voice came out harder than she intended. "He was terrified, and then the line went dead. I've already called the ranger station, and they said they'd start a search at first light, but I need to be there. Now." Something in her face must have convinced him, because Tom sighed and gestured to his boat. "I'll take you across, but I'm not staying. Last ferry back leaves at 7 a.m. tomorrow. You miss it, you're stuck until the weather clears, and that could be days." The crossing took 2 hours through increasingly rough water. Jennifer stood at the rail, watching Isle Royale emerge from the gray Lake Superior like something ancient and hungry. The island stretched long and narrow, its spine covered in dark forest that looked black against the winter sky. Even from the water, Jennifer could feel the weight of it, the oppressive sense of isolation. Tom radioed ahead, and a ranger met them at the Rock Harbor dock as night fell completely. She was younger than Jennifer expected, maybe late 20s, with tired eyes and a name tag that read S. Fontaine. "I'm Sarah," the ranger said, helping Jennifer with her pack. "I spoke to your brother 2 days ago. He came into the station pretty shaken up, said he'd gotten turned around on the Greenstone Ridge Trail. I offered to escort him back to his camp, but he insisted he could find it himself." She looked guilty. "I should have made him come with me." "Did he say anything else?" Jennifer asked as they walked toward the ranger station, their boots crunching on frozen ground. "About what scared him?" Sarah hesitated, her breath misting in the frigid air. "The temperature had to be well below 0. He asked me if we'd had any problems with wildlife acting strange. Said he'd heard something moving through his camp the night before, something big. And he kept talking about voices, how he'd heard someone calling for help, but when he went to investigate, there was no one there." Jennifer's stomach tightened. "What did you tell him?" "That sound carries strangely on the island, especially in winter. That he was probably hearing ice cracking on the lake, or trees splitting from the cold." Sarah's voice dropped. "But honestly, I've been hearing things too. The other ranger, Marcus, he grew up Ojibwe near Grand Portage. Last week he found marks on trees near Siskiwit Bay, spiral patterns carved into the bark. Said it was an old warning, that something was active in the forest. I thought he was trying to spook me, but..." They'd reached the station, a small building with lights that seemed too dim against the vast darkness pressing in from the forest. Sarah unlocked the door and they stepped into welcome warmth. "But what?" Jennifer pressed. "Marcus disappeared 3 days ago." Sarah's hands shook as she poured coffee from a thermos. "Left to check the West End campsites and never came back. I've been calling it in, but the Coast Guard can't send anyone until the weather clears, and I can't search the whole island alone. Park Service is sending backup, but not until tomorrow at the earliest." Jennifer felt her breath catch. 3 days ago, that's when Daniel said something started following him. Sarah met her eyes, and Jennifer saw the fear there, carefully controlled but definitely present. "Your brother's camp was on the Greenstone Ridge Trail, about 6 miles inland. I can take you there first thing in the morning, but Miss Chen, I need to be honest with you. If he wandered off the trail in this weather, especially at night..." "He's alive." Jennifer said it with more certainty than she felt. He called me this morning. He was running from something. From what? Jennifer almost said it. Wendigo, that word that felt dangerous even to think, but stopped herself. I don't know, but I'm going to find him. If this story is giving you chills, follow for more quality terror. Could you survive in Jennifer's place? Sarah set Jennifer up in one of the staff bunks, but sleep was impossible. Jennifer lay in the darkness, listening to the building creak and settle, to the wind howling outside with a voice that almost sounded like words. She kept her phone next to her pillow, volume turned up, praying it would ring again. Praying she'd hear Daniel's voice, even terrified, even screaming. At least it would mean he was alive. Instead, at 4:37 a.m., she heard something else. Emma's voice, clear as crystal, coming from somewhere outside. "Mommy, Mommy, I'm cold. Please come find me." Jennifer sat bolt upright, her heart hammering. For one horrible, irrational moment, she almost believed it. Almost let herself imagine that Emma hadn't died, that the last 3 years had been a nightmare, that her daughter was really out there needing her. Then rationality crashed back and Jennifer wanted to vomit. Someone was using her dead daughter's voice. Something was using it. She stumbled to the window and looked out at the darkness. In the dim light from the station, she could just make out the tree line about 50 yards away. And there, at the edge of the forest, something stood. It was too far and too dark to make out details, but Jennifer had the impression of impossible height, of limbs too long and angular to be human. As she watched, frozen, it tilted its head in a gesture that was almost curious. Then it stepped back into the trees and was gone. Jennifer backed away from the window, her whole body shaking. The voice came again, fainter now, deeper in the woods. "Mommy, please. It's so dark and I'm scared." She pressed her hands over her ears, squeezed her eyes shut. Not real. Whatever was out there, it wasn't Emma. Emma was dead. Emma was... A hand touched her shoulder and Jennifer screamed, "It's okay, it's me." Sarah had her flashlight up, her other hand raised placatingly. "I heard you moving around. Are you all right?" "There's something outside." Jennifer pointed toward the window with a trembling hand. "It was calling to me, using my daughter's voice." Sarah's face went pale. She moved to the window carefully, scanned the darkness. "I don't see anything." "It was there. It was..." Jennifer stopped, hearing how she sounded. Hysterical, crazy, like Daniel had probably sounded when he told Sarah about the voices. "Did you hear it? A child's voice?" "I heard the wind," Sarah said gently, but her eyes said something different. "Ms. Chen, I know you're under a lot of stress. Maybe you should try to get some rest. I'm not hallucinating." Jennifer's voice came out flat, hard. "My brother heard voices. Your partner heard something. Now I've heard it too. And you've heard it, haven't you? That's why you look so scared." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Every night for the past week. My sister's voice. She died in a car accident 5 years ago." Her hands clenched into fists. "It knows things, Jennifer, personal things. It called to me using inside jokes only Sarah and I knew. And last night..." "What?" "Last night it sounded like Marcus, screaming for help. I almost went out there." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "I got as far as the door before I remembered what Marcus told me. That you never answer the Wendigo. You never go when it calls. Because once you're in the woods, it's already too late." The sun rose slowly, reluctantly over Al Royale, turning the frozen landscape from black to gray. Jennifer and Sarah prepared to search in tense silence, packing supplies, checking radios. The temperature had dropped overnight to 15 below zero, and the forecast threatened snow. They set out at first light, following the trail markers toward where Daniel had last been seen. The forest pressed in around them, dense stands of spruce and birch that blocked most of the weak sunlight. Jennifer kept her eyes on the trail, trying not to look too deeply into the trees, but she felt watched. That sensation of predatory attention she'd had since hearing Emma's voice, the weight of something malevolent tracking their movement. 2 miles in, Sarah stopped abruptly. Oh God. Jennifer followed her gaze and felt her stomach drop. The birch tree next to the trail had its bark stripped in a spiral pattern, exactly like the woman at the gas station had described. The exposed wood underneath was darkened, and when Jennifer stepped closer, she caught a smell. Rot and something else. Something organic and wrong that made her gag. Marcus said these were warnings, Sarah whispered. Territory markers. It's telling other Wendigos. She stopped, looked embarrassed. I know how that sounds. Keep going, Jennifer said. He said it marks its hunting ground. The spirals get tighter as you get closer to its lair. They found 3 more marked trees in the next mile, each with tighter spirals. The forest seemed to grow quieter as they walked, until Jennifer realized with creeping horror that she couldn't hear any birds, any signs of life at all. Just the crunch of their boots and their breathing and the occasional crack of ice-laden branches. Daniel's camp appeared suddenly in a small clearing. A tent collapsed under snow. Camping equipment scattered like something had torn through the site in a rage. Jennifer rushed forward, calling her brother's name, but Sarah grabbed her arm. Wait, look at the tracks. Jennifer followed her pointing finger and felt the bottom drop out of her world. Footprints led away from the camp into the deeper forest. Human footprints, barefoot in the snow. But they were enormous, at least 18 inches long, and spaced impossibly far apart. And next to them, mixed with them, were smaller prints. Boot prints, Daniel's size. He went with it, Sarah breathed. He actually followed it. Jennifer knelt by the tracks, touching the edge of one boot print with her gloved hand. The snow around it was stained pink. Blood. How long ago? These are fresh. Maybe 6, 8 hours. Sarah checked her GPS unit. They're heading northwest toward Siskiwit Bay. That's where Marcus was going when he disappeared. Jennifer was already standing, already following the tracks. Sarah caught up to her, grabbed her shoulder. Jennifer, we can't. We need to wait for backup. My brother is out there. Jennifer's voice broke. My brother is hurt and he's with that thing and I am not losing him. I can't. She looked at Sarah with eyes that held 3 years of grief, 3 years of guilt. I lost Emma. I held her hand while she died and I couldn't do anything, couldn't save her. I won't let that happen again. I won't. Sarah stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay. But we stay together, we stay on the radio, and at the first sign of trouble we run. Deal? Deal. They followed the tracks deeper into the forest, into places where the trail markers disappeared and the trees grew so dense that noon looked like twilight. The temperature seemed to drop with every step, until Jennifer's face felt numb and her fingers ached inside her gloves. And the smell grew stronger. That rot-sweet stench that seemed to seep from the very ground. After an hour, they found the first body. It was a deer, or had been. Now it was just a carcass torn open with surgical precision, the meat stripped from the bones, the rib cage cracked apart. But what made Jennifer's gorge rise was that the bones were arranged, carefully, deliberately, in a pattern that looked almost like symbols. And carved into the frozen ground beneath the carcass were words in a language Jennifer didn't recognize. Ojibwe, Sarah said faintly. It says, the hungry one walks. The hungry one knows your name. Marcus wrote this? Maybe. Or, Sarah didn't finish the thought. They found the second body 100 yards further. Another deer, arranged the same way, with different words. Do not speak its name. Do not look directly at it. Do not answer when it calls. The third body wasn't a deer. Jennifer saw the ranger uniform first, the brown jacket torn and blood-stained, half buried in snow. Sarah made a sound like she'd been punched, stumbled forward. Jennifer caught her before she could reach the body. Don't, she said, even though she wanted to look away, wanted to run. Don't look at his face. But she'd already seen. Marcus's eyes were open, frozen in an expression of absolute terror. His mouth was open too, stretched impossibly wide, and his hands were clawed and bloody like he'd been trying to dig his way into the frozen earth. But worst of all was what had been carved into his forehead with what must have been his own knife. A spiral. Sarah was shaking, making small, gasping sounds. "He was my friend. We had drinks last week. He showed me pictures of his nephew. Sarah." Jennifer kept her voice firm, kept her own horror locked down. "Sarah, we need to keep moving. Daniel might still be alive. We can still save him." "Save him?" Sarah laughed, high and broken. "Did you see Marcus? Did you see what it did to him? That thing is going to kill your brother, Jennifer. It's probably already—" "No." The word came out so fierce that Sarah flinched. "Daniel called me this morning. He was alive this morning, and I'm going to find him." She started walking again, following the tracks, and after a moment Sarah followed. But Jennifer could hear her crying quietly, and knew the ranger was at her breaking point. They were both at their breaking point, walking into the territory of something that shouldn't exist, hunting a creature from mythology that killed and arranged its victims like art. The tracks led them to a frozen stream, and there they found Daniel's backpack torn open, his belongings scattered across the ice. His phone lay in pieces, deliberately smashed, and written in the snow in what Jennifer refused to believe was blood, "It wears his face now. Turn back." Sarah's voice was hollow. "Jennifer, please, this is insane. We need to turn back, call for help, wait for—" "There is no help coming." Jennifer picked up one piece of Daniel's phone, a fragment of the screen with part of her contact photo still visible. "We're alone out here. We've always been alone. Then we leave. We get back to the station. We get on the ferry tomorrow. We let the Coast Guard—" Jennifer looked at her. "You really think that thing is going to let us leave? It's been hurting us here, Sarah. Can't you feel it? Every marked tree, every body, it's been leading us exactly where it wants us to go." As if in answer, a voice drifted through the trees, Daniel's voice, weak and pleading. Jen, please help me. It hurts so much, please." Jennifer's breath caught. It sounded so real, so perfectly like her brother that for a moment she forgot everything she knew, every warning. She took a step toward the voice. Sarah grabbed her arm hard. "That's not him. Jen, I'm so cold. I can't feel my legs anymore. Please don't leave me." "That's not him," Sarah was yelling now, shaking Jennifer. "It's the Wendigo. It's trying to lure you." But Jennifer pulled free, because she'd heard something underneath the pleading, underneath the perfect imitation of her brother's voice. She'd heard Emma laughing, that particular giggle her daughter had made when she was happy, the sound Jennifer would have given anything to hear one more time. "It knows," Jennifer whispered. "It knows exactly what will break me." She started walking toward the voice, toward the deeper darkness between the trees. Sarah called after her, frantic, but Jennifer barely heard. She was remembering Emma's last days, the morphine dreams where her daughter talked to shadows, where she insisted something tall and hungry was waiting in the corner of the hospital room. Waiting. The trees opened into a small clearing, and Jennifer stopped. The Wendigo stood in the center, and it was nothing like the illustrations Jennifer had seen online, nothing like the folklore described. It was worse. So much worse. It had Daniel's face. Not wearing it like a mask. It was Daniel's face, perfectly replicated, attached to a body that was grotesquely wrong. The torso was skeletal, ribs visible through gray skin that looked like frost-covered leather. The arms were too long, ending in hands with fingers like branches, and it was tall, impossibly tall, at least 9 feet. Its head bent at an angle to fit under the lowest branches. But the face. Daniel's face looked at her with Daniel's eyes and smiled with Daniel's smile, and Jennifer's mind tried to reject what she was seeing, tried to make it make sense, and failed completely. "Jen." It spoke with Daniel's voice, but wrong somehow, like a recording played at the wrong speed. "I'm so glad you came. I've been waiting. Where's my brother?" Jennifer's voice shook, but she forced the words out. "Where's Daniel?" The thing's smile widened, showing too many teeth. "I'm your brother. Don't you recognize me? You're not him." You're... She couldn't say the name. Couldn't give it that power. I'm so hungry, Jen. It took a step toward her, and Jennifer heard bones creaking, heard ice cracking. I've been hungry for so long. Nothing satisfies. Nothing fills the emptiness. Behind it, Jennifer saw them. Bodies, a dozen at least, maybe more, arranged in a circle around the clearing. Some were old, reduced to frozen skeletons. Some were fresh. And one, Jennifer's legs nearly gave out. Daniel lay at the creature's feet, curled on his side, his skin blue-white with hypothermia, but his chest rose and fell. Shallow breaths. He was alive. Let him go. Jennifer kept her voice steady through sheer force of will. Take me instead. I'll come with you willingly. Just let him go. The Wendigo tilted its head, and the gesture was so perfectly Daniel that Jennifer wanted to scream. Why would I do that? I'm having so much fun. Want to know what I told him? I told him you were coming. I used Emma's voice. I said, Mommy's coming to save us, Danny. Just like she couldn't save me. Jennifer felt tears freeze on her cheeks. You're lying. Am I? It crouched down, running one too long finger across Daniel's cheek almost gently. He tried so hard to warn you away, that phone call this morning. That was real. I let him call. I wanted you to hear him beg. I wanted you to come. Why? The word came out broken. Because you can see me. The Wendigo stood, and in the failing light, Jennifer saw something flicker across its stolen face, something that might have been pain or hunger or both. You saw me 3 years ago in the hospital room, when your daughter was dying. You looked right at me and you saw. Jennifer's blood turned to ice. That was you? I was there for her. It stepped closer and the temperature dropped so fast Jennifer's breath turned to ice crystals. Such sweetness, such innocence. But you saw me before I could take her, and your seeing gave her protection. She died clean, unviolated. Its voice turned bitter. Do you know how rare that is? How hungry I was? So you followed me. Understanding crashed over Jennifer like a wave. You've been following me since Emma died. Waiting. The Wendigo smiled again, and this time there was nothing of Daniel in it. Waiting for you to be desperate enough, broken enough to come to me. And here you are. Sarah crashed through the trees behind Jennifer, breathing hard, raising her Ranger-issued pistol with shaking hands. Get away from her! The Wendigo's head swiveled with a crack of bone, regarding Sarah with empty eyes. Then it laughed, and the sound was like ice breaking, like trees splitting, like nothing human. Another offering, it said. How thoughtful. It moved faster than anything that size should be able to move, crossing the clearing in 2 strides. Sarah fired. 3 shots, center mass, the reports deafening in the quiet forest. The bullets hit. Jennifer saw the impact, saw the creature stagger. But it didn't stop. It grabbed Sarah by the throat, lifted her off the ground one-handed. Sarah's gun fell into the snow as she clawed at the thing's arm, gasping, her feet kicking uselessly. No! Jennifer rushed forward without thinking, throwing herself at the Wendigo's legs, trying to bring it down. It was like hitting a tree. The impact knocked the wind out of her and she fell into the snow, stunned. The creature looked down at her almost curiously, still holding Sarah aloft. You want to save everyone. That's your weakness. That's what makes you so delicious. It dropped Sarah, who crumpled to the ground gasping and coughing. Then it reached for Jennifer with both hands, and she saw her death in its eyes, saw her body arranged with the others, saw herself becoming nothing but a warning carved into frozen ground. Instead, the Wendigo jerked backward, stumbling. Daniel had grabbed its leg with both hands, his face contorted with effort, his lips blue but his eyes fierce. Run! He gasped. Jen, run! The creature roared, a sound that echoed through the forest like a physical force, sending snow cascading from branches. It kicked Daniel away contemptuously, sending him rolling across the clearing. Then it turned back to Jennifer and she saw that Daniel's face was melting away, revealing something underneath. Something with hollow eyes and a mouth full of broken glass teeth and skin that looked like ice pretending to be flesh. "Enough games," it said, and its voice was winter itself, cold and merciless and eternal. "I've been patient. I've waited 3 years. Now I feed." Jennifer scrambled backward, her hand closing around something in the snow. Sarah's gun. She raised it with both hands, aimed at the thing's center mass and pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. The Wendigo laughed again. "Did you think bullets would—" Jennifer didn't let it finish. She threw the useless gun at its face and ran, not away from Daniel, but toward him, sliding across the icy ground to grab her brother under the arms. He was dead weight, barely conscious, but terror gave her strength. She hauled him up, got his arm around her shoulders, and started dragging him toward the trees. Sarah appeared at her other side, taking Daniel's other arm, and together they stumbled into the forest, half carrying, half dragging him between them. Behind them, the Wendigo's footsteps crunched in the snow, steady and unhurried. It didn't need to chase. It knew they couldn't outrun it. "The ranger station," Sarah gasped. "If we can make it—" "It's 6 miles," Jennifer shot back. "We'll never." Daniel stirred between them, mumbled something. Jennifer leaned closer, trying to hear over the sound of their ragged breathing and the creature's pursuit. "Fire," he whispered. Marcus said, "Fire and sacred words. Only things that work." "What words?" Jennifer shook him. "Daniel, what words?" But her brother had passed out again, his head lolling against her shoulder. The Wendigo's voice drifted through the trees, somehow ahead of them now, though Jennifer hadn't seen it pass. "Do you want to know what Emma said at the end, when she saw me in that hospital room?" Jennifer tried not to listen, tried to focus on running, but the voice was everywhere, surrounding them. She said, "Mommy, don't let the hungry man take me. And you promised her, didn't you? You promised you wouldn't let anyone hurt her. But you couldn't keep that promise, just like you can't save your brother now." They burst out of the trees onto the frozen surface of Siskiwit Bay, and Jennifer's breath caught. They'd somehow gotten turned around, had been running in the wrong direction. The ranger station was miles away. They were alone on the ice with nothing but open sky above them and freezing water below. The Wendigo emerged from the tree line, and in the dim twilight it seemed to grow taller, its shadow stretching impossibly across the snow. When it spoke, its voice was almost gentle. "You can't run from hunger, Jennifer. You can't outrun what's already inside you." Jennifer looked down at Daniel, at his unconscious face, at her baby brother who used to follow her everywhere, who'd held her hand at Emma's funeral, who'd been there when she wanted to die from grief. Then she looked at Sarah, this stranger who'd risked everything to help her. And Jennifer realized the Wendigo was right. She couldn't save everyone. She'd learned that lesson 3 years ago in a hospital room that smelled like antiseptic and death. But maybe she could save someone. "Sarah," she said quietly, "take Daniel. Get him back to the station. Radio for help." "What? No, I'm not leaving. It wants me." Jennifer met the ranger's eyes. "It's been following me for 3 years. It's always been about me." She looked at the Wendigo, at the thing that had haunted her nightmares, that had stood in Emma's hospital room, that had brought her to this frozen hell. "Let them go. You can have me, but let them go." The creature tilted its head, considering. The last light of day caught its eyes, and they reflected like an animal's, yellow and empty. "An interesting offer," it said, "but I'm so very, very hungry. Why settle for one when I can have all 3? It started across the ice toward them, and Jennifer heard it cracking beneath its weight, heard water sloshing far below. The sound gave her an idea. Desperate, probably suicidal, but an idea. "Sarah, when I say run, you run. Understand? Don't look back. Don't stop." She didn't wait for an answer. Jennifer stepped away from the others, away from her unconscious brother and the terrified ranger, and walked toward the Wendigo, toward the thing that had stolen 3 years of her life, that had turned her grief into its hunting ground. "You want to know something?" Jennifer's voice was steady now, calm in a way that surprised even her. Emma wasn't afraid at the end. She saw you in that corner, saw what you really were, and you know what she did? She smiled. She took my hand and she smiled and she said, "It's okay, Mommy. The hungry man can't hurt me. He's the one who's scared." The Wendigo stopped. For the first time, something flickered across its inhuman features. Uncertainty. "She saw through you," Jennifer continued, still walking forward, her boots echoing on the ice. "A dying 6-year-old saw what you really are. Not some ancient evil, not some unstoppable force, just hunger, just emptiness, just pathetic endless need that can never be filled. Be silent." The creature's voice had lost its confidence. "You're not powerful. You're hollow. And that terrifies you, doesn't it? Because if you're just emptiness, if there's nothing inside you but hunger, then what are you really? Just a thing that consumes and is never satisfied, never happy, never full, never anything but empty." "Silence!" The Wendigo lunged for her and Jennifer dove to the side, rolling across the ice. Behind her, she heard Sarah dragging Daniel away, heard their boots on the frozen surface. The creature's weight came down where Jennifer had been standing, and the ice screamed. Cracks radiated outward like a spider web, and Jennifer saw the Wendigo's expression change, saw fear, real and primal, cross its stolen features. "You don't belong here," Jennifer said, getting to her feet, backing away slowly, leading it further onto the weakest ice. "You don't belong anywhere. You're not alive. You're not dead. You're just hungry, forever empty, forever alone." Each word seemed to hit the creature like a physical blow. It staggered and the ice cracked louder. Water began seeping up through the fissures. "What was it like?" Jennifer asked, and she was crying now, her voice breaking. "Standing in Emma's room, watching her die, knowing you couldn't have her? Knowing she pitied you? Knowing a little girl saw how pathetic you were?" The Wendigo roared, and reality seemed to warp around it. The temperature plummeted so fast Jennifer felt her lungs freeze, felt ice forming on her skin. It charged at her, moving with impossible speed, its mouth opening wider than any mouth should open, showing a throat that went down forever into darkness. Jennifer didn't run. She stood her ground, and in the moment before it reached her, she whispered the only words that mattered. "I forgive you." The creature stopped inches from her face, its breath, if it had breath, washing over her like grave dirt and old snow. Its eyes searched hers, confused, almost vulnerable. "What?" "I forgive you for taking my daughter's peace, for hunting me, for hurting Daniel. I forgive you. You can't." It sounded lost, childlike. "No one forgives. Because Emma was right. You're scared. You're so scared of being nothing that you consume everything, trying to prove you exist. But it never works, does it? You're still empty. You'll always be empty." The Wendigo stumbled backward and the ice gave way. It went through with a crack like thunder into water that was black and cold enough to stop a heart instantly. Jennifer watched it thrash, watched it try to climb back onto the ice only to have the frozen surface break under its weight. Its face cycled through a dozen forms: Daniel, Emma, Marcus, Sarah, Jennifer herself, like it was trying to find one that would let it survive. But the lake was pulling it down, and something in the water was pulling harder. Something older, something that had waited in the depths of Lake Superior since before humans came to these shores. Jennifer felt it rising, felt its attention turn toward the Wendigo with something that might have been hunger of its own. The creature looked at Jennifer one last time with eyes that were suddenly horribly human. "Please," it said in Emma's voice. "Mommy, please, it's so cold and dark and I'm so scared." Jennifer's heart shattered, but she didn't move. Couldn't move. Because she knew, in the way you know things in nightmares with absolute certainty, that if she tried to save it now, she'd be pulled down too. They'd all be pulled down. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The Wendigo screamed. Not with rage, but with fear and loneliness and something that might have been grief. And then the water closed over it, and it was gone. The ice sealed itself with a sound like breaking glass, and the forest went quiet. Jennifer stood there until Sarah and Daniel reached her, until the ranger was pulling her back from the edge of the broken ice, until she collapsed between them on solid ground. Daniel was awake now, barely, his eyes unfocused but alive. Alive. Is it gone? Sarah's voice shook. Is it really gone? Jennifer looked at the place where the Wendigo had fallen through, at the dark water barely visible beneath fresh ice. She could still feel something down there, watching from the deep. The lake had taken the Wendigo, but she wasn't sure it had destroyed it. Maybe it couldn't be destroyed. Maybe things like that, things born from hunger and cold and human suffering, could never truly die. But it was gone from here. For now. Yeah, Jennifer said. It's gone. They made it back to the ranger station as night fell completely. Moving slowly, Daniel supported between them. The forest seemed less oppressive now, less watching. But Jennifer couldn't shake the feeling that they'd escaped something by the narrowest margin, that they'd been seconds from joining the bodies in that clearing. Sarah radioed for emergency extraction, and the Coast Guard arrived within hours, their helicopter landing on the frozen bay with searchlights blazing. EMTs loaded Daniel onto a stretcher, worried about hypothermia and frostbite. But he was conscious now, gripping Jennifer's hand with surprising strength. You came for me, he said, his voice rough. I heard you. When I was in that clearing, when I thought I was dead, I heard you calling me back. Always, Jennifer told him. I'll always come for you. They found Marcus's body the next day, and 7 others, hikers and campers who'd gone missing over the past 3 winters. The Park Service closed Isle Royale indefinitely, citing dangerous wildlife activity and severe weather conditions. The official report called it a tragedy, a series of unfortunate accidents compounded by harsh conditions and inadequate preparation. Jennifer never told them the truth. Neither did Sarah. Neither did Daniel, because who would believe them? Who would believe that a creature from Algonquian mythology had been hunting humans on a Michigan island, that it had worn the faces of its victims, that it had died, maybe, in the black water of Lake Superior? Sarah left the Ranger Service 2 months later. She sent Jennifer a letter explaining that she couldn't work in isolated places anymore, couldn't stand the silence of deep forests. She'd taken a job at a park in Arizona, somewhere sunny and crowded and safe. She never mentioned Isle Royale. But at the end of the letter, she wrote, I still hear it sometimes, in my dreams, using my sister's voice. Do you? Jennifer did. Not every night, but often enough. She'd wake at 2 or 3 a.m., her heart pounding. Sure, she'd heard Emma calling from the corner of her bedroom, but when she turned on the lights, there was nothing there. Just shadows. Just memory. Daniel recovered physically within weeks, but the psychological damage lingered. He refused to talk about what happened in that clearing, what the Wendigo had said to him in Jennifer's voice, in Emma's voice. He moved to Florida, as far from winter as he could get, and called Jennifer every day for the first year just to hear her voice, to confirm she was real and alive and safe. Time passed. Winter came and went. Jennifer returned to her life in Milwaukee, her job, her tiny apartment. On the surface, everything went back to normal. But on February nights, when the temperature dropped below 0 and the wind howled with voices, Jennifer would stand at her window and look toward the north, toward Lake Superior and the island beyond. And sometimes, just sometimes, she thought she saw something impossibly tall standing at the edge of her vision, just outside the streetlight's reach, watching, waiting, hungry. She'd learned to live with it. The way you learn to live with grief, with loss, with the knowledge that there are things in the world that defy explanation, things that hunger, things that wear the faces of the people you love, and use their voices to lure you into darkness. The Ojibwe elders Sarah had consulted before leaving told her something that Jennifer thought about often. The Wendigo is not just a monster, it's a warning. It's what happens when need becomes everything, when hunger is all that's left. It's the shadow we cast when we forget how to be human. Jennifer understood now. The Wendigo hadn't just been hunting her. It had been showing her something, showing her what grief could become if she let it consume her. What she could become if she spent the rest of her life trying to save people she'd already lost. Emma was gone. Jennifer had accepted that finally. But Daniel was alive. Sarah was alive. Jennifer herself was alive. And maybe that had to be enough. She'd learned to forgive. Not just the Wendigo, but herself. For not saving Emma. For not being able to fix everything. For being human and breakable and scared. Some nights she still heard her daughter's voice. Still felt that pull toward darkness. But she didn't answer anymore. She knew better now. She knew that some calls shouldn't be answered. Some hungers shouldn't be fed. Some doors shouldn't be opened. And on the coldest nights, when the wind sounded almost like words, Jennifer would whisper into the darkness, "I know you're there. I know you're hungry. But you can't have me. Not today. Not ever." Whether it hurt her, whether it understood, she didn't know. But the shadows would recede, and the night would grow quiet, and morning would come eventually. It always did, even in the deepest winter, even in the darkest woods, even when the hungry things called your name. Morning always came, and that Jennifer had learned was enough. Hope you felt real chills. If you appreciate genuine horror, consider following. Which moment scared you most?